Good morning, and thank you for joining us for another COVID-19 toolkit. I'm Bela Gor from Business Disability Forum, and today I've got Rick Williams, who's a consultant with Business Disability Forum, and Christine Hemphill, Managing Director of Open Inclusion, with me, and we're going to talk about COVID-19 and your disabled customers. But before I start, I should let you know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website after today and in the COVID-19 toolkit, where there's lots of other resources as well that you might like to take a look at. It's also being live captioned by MyClearText. So if you do want to turn on the closed captions, please navigate to the bottom of your screen where there is a menu, and you should see closed captions turn on, and the live captioning will come on and you'll get subtitles. All mics will be muted except for the panelists throughout this webinar, but you can ask questions via the Q&A box, and we will come and answer some questions and put your questions to the panelists towards the end of this webinar. So that's the housekeeping, and I want to move on now because to talk about this world, this new environment that we are in currently, and we're talking about disabled customers. And I think it's fair to say that quite a lot of disabled customers are facing some challenges at the moment. But it's important to say that businesses are also facing challenges. Most, from the very largest to the very small, have had to change the way in which they serve customers, all customers, and they've had to do so in a matter of days and weeks, and that has not been without its challenges as well. So we are going to discuss some tips and best practice and things that we've learned that is good that some businesses are doing, to share that, as well as advice for others that might be struggling. So first off, welcome Rick and Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Morning, Bella.
We're going to start with this changing environment that I mentioned, because disabled people haven't changed. People generally haven't changed, but the environment in which we live in has changed quite dramatically. And we often say in the disability world, don't we, that it's not people, it's the environment that disables people. So have the barriers that disabled people are facing in the current environment changed, and how? Christine, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, a fabulous question, a really important observation, Bella, that if we're talking about disability, we're talking about that mismatch between people and their environment. And actually, as you mentioned, change is happening to people, but not due to their long-term conditions, but actually some people's health or mental health or emotional health is changing. But actually far more significantly is the change in environment, and both the combination of people being in lockdown but also changing work environments, so working from home far more fully, has meant that people are in very different places to where they were a couple of months ago. And that's caused a whole new raft of mismatches that need to be rematched to reduce that disability that people are facing in their day-to-day, managing their lives.
Absolutely. So, Rick, I mean, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, what's interesting, Bella, is, I mean, we know that organisations continue to struggle sometimes with the whole concept of the social model approach, identify and remove barriers, etc. And what they've had to do very quickly is try and come up with a system that takes into account the new normal, the new things that need to happen when you're serving customers. And what's happened, I think, a lot of the time is they've gone for the traditional or the typical customer journey as they see it now, which is entirely understandable. I think the challenge is that they create a whole new series of barriers that people like me in the past have worked our way around or found how to deal with, or the service providers have found a way of getting rid of. So we're, in a sense, we're starting again with a lot of this.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to start with is who are we talking about? Because here in the UK, we hear this term vulnerable groups a lot, and it's a term that's used by the government. And I know governments around the world are using similar terminology, but vulnerable doesn't mean disabled necessarily. It's quite here certainly, it's a very small group of people who are particularly susceptible to the COVID-19 illness, to the coronavirus. And they're people, for example, who've had organ transplants or are particularly immunosuppressed or have got respiratory conditions. And I don't know if that's very well understood generally, what this word vulnerable means. I mean, Christine, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really important, and it kind of picks up on the last one as well, which is this environment has moved very fast, and vulnerability as a term has changed also because there is vulnerability, specific susceptibility to this particular virus, and then there is susceptibility to poor service as vulnerability, might have been, is more generally defined by organisations like the FCA prior to this. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what that means, and that there are different groups that may have been defined in the past that are not all particularly susceptible to COVID-19 now. So someone who's very physically healthy and active but happens to be a wheelchair user is not specifically susceptible in COVID-19. There are specific challenges in accessing different services, but not to the particular condition. Whereas someone else who might not have identified as disabled or identified as being specifically vulnerable prior to this, but may have had pneumonia 4 or 5 times in their life and have a very weak immune system, and particularly the lung system, they are very at risk at this moment. So as organisations think about this, and as individuals think about how they manage themselves within this environment, as Rick says, people have fabulous adaptation techniques that work for them brilliantly, and all of a sudden the environment's changed quite fast, and the organisational context has changed fast as well, and it's quite hard for people to keep up and manage through those changes, set in new systems that are appropriate for the current environment, for the current groups that really do get advantaged by some specific responsibilities, care, and customer considerations around them.
Yeah, and Rick, I mean, you've done a lot of work with in financial organisations and others, haven't you, in communications on where this word vulnerable has been used differently.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with the term is, as a disabled person itself, I don't like the term at all. I think it's quite pejorative. But it's also interpreted in very many different ways by people. So some sectors of our service providers, financial, communications, have vulnerability, or the term vulnerable, built into their guidance and into their legislation. Whereas most people see vulnerable as something entirely different from a subjective viewpoint. And the term being used in COVID, it means something again. So what we've got is a very confusing picture of who we're actually talking about. So most people, when I say that as a blind person, I'm not considered vulnerable in terms of COVID, they can't believe it. But I understand it because it's my job to understand it. But from an emotional and subjective viewpoint, it is a very confusing term being used. And when you project that into service users, I suspect the same confusion exists about the groups that are trying to support and take into account redesigning and developing their service provision.
Yeah, and I mean, if we move on to shopping, which is one of the biggest areas, shopping for food or going out to collect medicine, which in most countries is still permitted. The government has said that you should shop online if you can, but of course that is really difficult because a lot of businesses, a lot of supermarkets didn't have a huge online element to their service provision for before this, and now are being asked to move to almost 100%, which they can't do in the space and time. So the people are going shopping, but they've got to maintain social distance at the same time, and that's causing some particular challenges for people with some disabilities. If I could come to you, Rick, first for your own experience of that.
The thing I've noticed more than anything else, Bella, is the loss of my independence. So up until recently, I could go shopping, not fully independently, but I could go to a shop, get help, other people would help, etc. I could do all the things I actually needed to pretty much by myself with help being provided on an ad hoc basis. That's all stopped now. I can't go shopping. Social distancing or keeping the distances in any way, shape or form is impossible if you can't see what's going on. So that's a real challenge. And I think the other side, of course, is that being told to shop online doesn't really help when the majority of websites are still inaccessible or have significant barriers that people who have access requirements when shopping online, their websites just can't be used. So it is a bit of a perfect storm in some ways. So that's unfortunate, to say the least. And what it's done is, it's just highlighted the challenges and magnified them and undermined all of the existing methodologies anyone might have put in place to deal with their lives independently.
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting point about losing independence and social distancing. This term that we're hearing everywhere of keeping 2 meters apart. And Christine, I know that you've been doing some research with disabled people about their own experiences, people with different disabilities, and the challenges that they're encountering with social distancing and physical shopping. And would you like to share some of that with us?
Yes, and you know, I totally hear and understand what Rick's saying, because we know anyone who's vision impaired, and you know, even more so if they have a multiple sensory need, such as, you know, people who are deaf-blind, it's, you know, almost impossible to maintain social distancing because they don't know where other people are. So that's an obvious one. There's some less obvious ones as well, and I think two groups to think about, well, particularly, you know, in the neurodiversity sector. We had a great comment from one of our participants in the research who was talking about 2 meters doesn't really mean anything to her. She's dyspraxic, and distance is just a slightly random concept. That 2 meters is like, what's 2 meters? And this is just a really lovely example of how to adapt to the new environment in very practical ways, because it was Sainsbury's that put an ad somewhere that said that's 2 trolleys. And as soon as they made that change to it's not 2 meters, but that's 2 trolleys, I get it. You know, she kind of went, that was brilliant. And they were literally her words, because that made it a tangible measure that she could then know what that is and keep that in mind as she's going around a shop. The other one is people that you know, have mental health challenges, or say someone who's got dementia, or someone who's you know, cognitively feels much safer being very close to someone. And if that's someone in their household and that they are very close to that person when they're shopping, you know, it should, you know, people kind of say, well, why do you need 2 people? Well, that goes back to that independence that Rick's talking about. If you're always expecting someone else to do that for you, that takes a lot of that independence away. But that person, they don't feel safe to be in that environment without that kind of physical closeness of someone. So different people have different experiences of that new ask of people. The ask is absolutely reasonable and understandable, but the challenge of fulfilling to that ask is quite, you know, varies quite, you know, distinctly across different groups.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting because I know, you know, anecdotal stories of people who wanted to go shopping with their carer. They wanted to choose what they buy, but their carer physically lifts things off shelves, and others where there's older people, not all older, but people with dementia who can't be left alone while the other person that they live with goes shopping. So they have to take the other person with them. They're often both over 70, but they're not in the category for priority when it comes to online shopping. So it's a real sort of storm of how do they get the essentials. And a lot of stores are saying one adult only. But I think the tip there is be flexible, and it's really difficult for staff. I mean, I realize that where, you know, you're trying to get people on the front line, dealing with hundreds of people every day, and trying to apply a rule that then needs to be flexed. It's a reasonable adjustment, but a new one.
Yeah, interestingly as well, Bella, one of the supermarket chains have introduced a no-touch rule in terms of the products. So you're not allowed to pick it up and look at it. You just have to pick it up and put it in your trolley. And I think that's going to cause some additional challenges. So there's all sorts of things going on here that service providers, supermarket shops need to think about in terms of the adjustment process. But related to that, I think also interestingly, is the reactions of members of the public to people who get, if you like, that adjustment. And there have been quite a number of examples of aggressive interventions from people who don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's true, and it's difficult again for frontline staff because they need to stay safe. They need to stay 2 meters apart, which means often raising your voice, which can exacerbate things if people are getting a bit irate. So that there is sort of, I know we said at the webinar last week that many larger stores are employing more security guards. To help with that situation and to try and diffuse it, people who know how to diffuse it. And the no touch thing is interesting because I know some people with visual impairments are using magnifying glasses or picking things up too. But there are tips that you could give to shops. Again, it's more work up front, but if you're not supposed to pick something up, then you have to be able to see it if you can see it. First off, so it means making the tins all face forward, or making sure that everything is clearly visible and things that haven't moved to the back of the shelf, if you like. So you have to sort of reach up and pick it out to see that it's the one that you want. You know, is it the juice with juicy bits or not juicy bits? You've got to be able to see that before you pick it up, and that's Christine.
I think what's really important here is this conversation that we're saying, which is stop and put a layer of consideration on. Because what's been very hard with such a rapid change is for rules, guidelines, processes, you know, centrally directed ways of managing customers to have come through the organisation fast enough to a very broad frontline staff, some organisations of which are having to put more staff on because of the environment that we're in, particularly in essential services. So, you know, you've also got new staff. So to really, as an organisation, say to your frontline staff, here is our general guidelines and our general how we're trying to keep the public safe and look after our customers in a brand accredited way. But also, let's recognise, you know, as Jutta from OCAD in Canada always talks about, you've got the 80% in the middle, but it's actually the real margins of experience that are the hardest ones to design for proactive, you know, ahead of time. They're the ones you need to give people some flexibility to manage on the spot, but also that awareness ahead of time. The thing you can really say there is people have their own personal context that we cannot imagine at the moment. We know that the majority of disability is actually invisible, so you can't see it. You don't know the context people are living in. You don't know that the fact that there's 2 older people that have come in, that one of them may have dementia, you can't see that. So just stopping and considering before that moment of intervention, whether you're a member of the public or whether you're a customer service person, to really consider, I don't know 100% of the context of this individual. Maybe I'll ask first and see if I can help first, rather than assume and intervene in a way that might be completely inappropriate that you're not aware of.
Yeah, that's really helpful advice there. And I wanted to move on now about from shopping to accessing finances and money, so paying for things. Now we're all being told to use contactless wherever possible, but are there issues that retailers need to think about when it comes to disabled people and how they pay? So Rick, you're smiling there.
Well, yeah, I mean, contactless is great, but obviously the point of contactless is that you're not actually passing anything or touching the assistant. So they need to know how to actually tell you how to put something on the contact list or be close to the contact machine in a very simple way. And that really, people get very hung up about that. In terms of cash, dealing with cash and things, it's always been easier in many ways rather than the plastic approach. But the plastic approach is becoming the new standard. So there are barriers there for people. And the shops and who take the plastic need to understand that there has to be some way of supporting people using it that doesn't involve contact person to person. What that means is their staff need the confidence to be able to have that conversation without embarrassing themselves or annoying the other person.
And I think there's something there for banks as well, because some people just don't use cards, whether because of disability or because of age, and they still go into cash points to get cash out, which means going out. I mean, I think that is still happening. Was that your experience, Christine?
Yeah, I think it's certainly, some people prefer cash, and actually if you think about people who have either financial health issues or cognitive issues where cash is more tangible, it's more obvious that's a 10, that's a 1, and it becomes a little, for some people that's easier to manage and to budget, and especially in these times where financial context is a lot more important to many people because of the impact on the economy and people's work. So there is an element to some people prefer cash. There's also two other layers to this, which is where digital is working and not working for people. So one is point of purchase. So at actually the payment point, how accessible is that? Is it physically reachable by someone who's a wheelchair user or very short of stature? Is it able to be used by someone who's visually impaired, or do they need someone else? Has it actually got a touchpad where there is a raised point in the middle of it? If people are paying over £30 and they can't just do contactless. So how well set up is that point of purchase for various access needs? And the second thing is, if you're only using digital money, you need to be able to move your money into your digital account, digitally into your account, because actually it's very hard to get to branches now, and that's another point of challenge for people. So the actual, the banks, I know some of the banks have done fabulous work on improving the accessibility of their digital banking, but this has put more pressure on that again, and all banks will need to be held to a much higher level of digital banking accessibility so that we can support people using digital money rather than going to the bank, the branch, and getting cash out and doing it in a much more traditional way.
Yeah, I mean, online, Rick, you've been doing work for some years now on inaccessible websites, click away pound, and so how are things at the moment when it comes to for disabled people, when most of us need to shop for most things online?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that banks, by and large, are getting better. I think there are certain challenges with using various technologies with the bank. So whether you're using a phone, a tablet, or a laptop, or whatever, there are always going to be challenges. They're always slightly different. But the banks are actually quite a lot better at that. I think the challenge comes if you're doing online banking with things like creating a new payee. They can be very complicated. And some of the new security rules they've introduced are not really that easy to use. I'm pretty tech savvy and I struggle sometimes with it, trying to understand what they're saying. Having said that, there are one or two new developments coming on which I think are really interesting. Came across an app recently where you can actually send someone an invoice or bill using a text message, and it's linked to a particular app, and then you can just pay it through the app on the phone without actually going into your bank. It's all approved, I mean, and it's signed off and everything, but it's very easy because it makes it a lot easier and a lot more accessible. So things are moving on quite quickly.
That's quite interesting. So, I mean, just to reiterate, today in this webinar, we're talking about customers, COVID-19 and customers and challenges that disabled people might be facing in the current environment rather than the employment side of things. But do you have any tips for businesses, Rick, that might be setting up an online service for the very first time or improving an online service that they had, a presence that they had, but that wasn't their main outlet?
Yeah, I mean, the two basic fundamentals are design it to standards and stick to those standards and get some people with access needs to actually try it out first. They're pretty well recognised. I think the challenge is that people tend not to follow them. User testing is particularly useful, and this is not just about blind people. In our research, it's only about 60% of people with access needs online who are visually impaired. The other 40% come from a whole range of arise from a whole range of conditions where access needs are created because of the way a website is designed or its functionality is designed. So sticking to the international standards and getting some disabled people who have access needs to tell you what they think of it before you launch it.
Okay, I'm going to ask you how, if you're a small business, how do you do that? I mean, where do you find these international standards and where do you find these disabled people who are going to test it for you?
Okay, so the international standards are actually very well written. There's a lot of information. All you need to do is Google WAI, Web Accessibility Initiative. And there's a lot of very basic guides. Scope are doing a lot of work on this. If you go to Scope, for example, they are saying they will give you free feedback on your website's accessibility while this is all going on. So there's a lot of information out there. Getting disabled people to test it, well, a bit harder, but let's be honest, most people know someone who's disabled, and at a very basic level, just ask them, can you buy something if I give you this website?
We can also help with that. That's the majority of what Open does as a business, is helps organisations really understand what the customer experience is like for people with different access needs, and we, totally reinforce your point that it's not just people with vision impairments that have trouble online. We do a lot of usability testing of organisations, end-to-end process. And in particularly, digital process or physical, but we do the digital very regularly, and find quite significant barriers in other communities, such as people with dexterity needs, or people who think differently or process differently or have different memory challenges. And you can design better to support all of those needs. Once the need has been identified, actually most of them are quite easy to then find a solution to work around that and make sure that it is inclusive of all those needs. It's understanding that need is there, and that those people either have some friction in the process or a real barrier in the process that they just can't get through.
Yeah. So once you've ordered your item, whatever it might be, it needs to be delivered. So we're talking about the new customer journey, which is starting in your own armchair way on your computer, if you're able to use that in the first place, and then you get it delivered. Are you hearing much about deliveries? Is that all going smoothly? I don't know who wants to answer.
Sorry. Yes and no. I think it's a mixture. So if you can still do click and collect in some places, like at the post office, but I have to say they're not easy to use in the sense of the distancing and the way they deal with people who turn up. Can be quite a difficult process because of the 2-metre rule. Domestically, frankly, it depends as much on the person making the delivery as it does on anything else. So they all have systems, as far as I can see, that say, we're going to distance, you don't need to sign, all of that sort of thing. But of course, if you can't lift the package, you can't see the package, they put it down somewhere, there are challenges. So it depends on the proactivity and the willingness of the person making it to help, I think, to some degree.
Yeah, Christine, you were nodding there. Was there something you wanted to add?
I really reinforce that, and particularly that it depends on the person that turns up. And then I think a couple of challenges. Firstly, the the process to get a delivery slot. So prior to this situation, not that many people got deliveries relative to now. So the demand has just exploded. And therefore, it's very difficult to get a slot. And as we were talking about before, different organisations have different groups that get priority slots, but a lot of people with quite significant needs and preferences and reasons to not want to be able to, either not want to be able to or not wish to go in store, are not within that group of priority slots. So firstly, there's a challenge just getting a slot. Secondly, something we were talking about before, that there's limited options for people with different access needs. So if someone had always used, say, one supermarket because it had particularly good digital accessibility, and I don't mind calling people out that are good. I know Ocado has very good digital accessibility because some of our panel members use that and have found it, you know, really good in the past. But the demand for them has gone up exponentially overnight. All of a sudden, it's much harder for them to get a slot. So the delivery becomes that point of limitation. They've got to then go and see if they can find someone else that might not be so good at the front end. So it's delivery itself has caused some of the issues that have effects, you know, ratcheting up the line. And then the other thing is, when people get to the door and they've got a delivery, I know from our experience prior to this period, working with retailers and understanding what delivery experience was like, we had some research we did where there was a lady with MS who absolutely loved that one of the organisations, they were always happy to bring it into the kitchen and put it on the table. And for her, that was just a very significant benefit, because it meant she could just get it from the table into the fridge or into the cupboard, which was a huge amount of energy saving. And for someone that's got limited energy, that was, you know, very, very great, you know, customer experience benefit, you know, a real advantage for her. Now, obviously, in this period, that becomes much harder, and it depends on the person how much they're prepared to help you or not. And therefore, again, those challenges have just moved.
Yeah. That's so interesting as well, and it's, you know, it's not just supermarket deliveries, it's everything that you're buying online now from all sorts of different retail parcel deliveries as well. And I mean, there are some tips that I tried to write for the COVID-19 toolkit for delivery drivers, and it's really difficult because yes, they need to stay safe as well, and they do need to stay that 2-meter distance, but there are things again that can be done up front on the website. If you could say and have a box where you can say, please leave the parcel in this particular location, a very precise location, and that the delivery driver does that, then somebody who might not be able to see it will know where it is. So, or if people got difficulty bending down, if things are left on the floor, if you could arrange for a little table to be left outside your flat door, or, you know, your apartment door, or the porch, or whatever, and ask delivery drivers whether it's a takeaway food service or a parcel that's being delivered and left on the table, that might make it a lot easier for somebody. It's a tiny thing, but just to be able to then, you know, lift it off and take it indoors, and that there are these small things. There's also people not being able to get to the door in time. And again, it sounds sort of such a small thing, but if you ring the doorbell and stand 2 meters away and then nobody comes to the door, you might think they're not in, but actually they may have mobility issues, which means that they're taking quite a long time to come to the door, or they don't hear the doorbell. And again, an upfront way of saying, I'm hard of hearing or I'm deaf, can you send me a text to say that you're outside the door, or if you can give me a slot, a time slot. You know, I know in my case of my mother, she'll put her hearing aids in if she knows that there's a time slot, and she doesn't wear them all the time because she's completely on her own and they're not comfortable. So I think quite a lot of people might relate to that. So that there are things that you could do, but again, it's up front, isn't it?
I think you're right, Bella. I think that one of the things that is the challenge is the inconsistency and the dependence on the person making the delivery doing what they think is the right thing and not being embarrassed about doing the right thing. So I've had a couple of examples where people have rung the bell, I've gone to answer the door, and there's complete silence. And you just think, well, hello, what's going on here, sort of thing. You just close the door, which has always caused a few interesting issues. Other people have been really, really sensible. The other day a guy was just standing there and he said, I'm from Royal Mail, I have a parcel for Mr. Williams, etc. How do you want me to, I'm going to put it down in front of you, etc. He just talked me through the process. He said, I don't need a signature, but I do need to take a photograph of the package in your door. And he just talked me through it in a very sensible way, no patronising, no embarrassment, and it was fine. The other guy didn't know what to do, got embarrassed. It was caused a bit of confusion, shall we say.
Yeah.
So trying to get that consistency and confidence into the drivers is one of the key things.
I think that's a really important point, Rick, that disability confidence is being exposed very fully now. So those organisations that have trained their staff and have built some awareness of people have different access needs, and to have the confidence to just say, it appears you have a need, what works for you, to ask, open that conversation to allow that to happen in a much more natural and fluid way. They're really going to be advantaged at the moment, because there are more uncertain situations that you can't just put a rule in place and a guideline in place for all staff. The other thing is to look at your journeys, the core customer journeys that are relevant to your organisation right now, and to actually do an assessment of them now under these conditions, so that you start to pick up some of those regular interaction challenges that are happening through the system, and then start to consider that centrally and say, how can we minimise the challenges that we're creating, all those moments of difficulty that are out there in the system under these conditions. Because any research that was done prior to this, we're now in a very different situation, so that might not be so relevant.
Sure. And it's not just about food and medicine, it's about leisure as well. And a lot of people are talking about having more time. I don't seem to have that more time. I seem to be working quite hard, but some people do. So like everyone else, disabled people are looking for sources of entertainment that they can access from their own homes, and trying to stay fit and healthy. So Rick, what are you doing to stay, your usual fit and healthy self?
Yeah, well, opening a bottle of wine takes a lot of effort, I think you'll find that. I'm quite lucky in the sense that I take full use of my time, allocated time, to go for a walk with my wife. I tried it once by myself, and I just found the whole process too difficult and stressful to make sure I was keeping distance, and it annoyed a few people, etc. So I just don't do it. I have bought a few of the online sort of keep fit things. Frankly, I haven't found them at all useful, because I can't follow what's going on. They're designed for people who can see and watch and what's going on. And it takes a lot of motivation to actually exercise. So one of the things that I have started doing is linking up with a couple of people through Zoom and trying to do some exercise together. It is quite entertaining, so it makes it more fun, but you're also more motivated. But I have to say, it is a real effort of will to do it indoors by yourself, especially if you can't use the full range of facilities that exist online.
Yeah, no, interesting. Christine, have you had any examples? I mean, not just about keeping fit, but also keeping, entertained and occupied.
Yeah, not so much on the fitness as yet coming through from the research, but on the entertained, I've got a few entertaining stories, one of which, a bit like you, Bella, I'm going to share my parents' story. My mother loves music, and one of the kind of highlights of her week socially is to go and play music with her friends, and they're now doing that on Zoom. And my sister and I were joking the other day that would be the one to Zoom bomb into, because could you imagine some poor Zoom bomber trying to get some useful information and coming to a bunch of, I think there's one or two of them under 70, majority are over 80. So, listening to a recorder group. But, that's a really fun way of keeping the concept of what they were doing before, still keeping that social connection, having some fun, giggling about when it goes wrong and the timing, because someone's Wi-Fi is not so good, the timing all gets out, and keeping, as Rick was talking about, socially motivated with others, which I think is so important at the moment. The other
Yeah.
thing, we're seeing people try novel experiences. And I think this is really important, again, for organisations that are offering entertainment, that's some of what they do, that people are trying things that they didn't try before. So people are bored of watching, Prime or Netflix or whichever streaming service they had. And so they're trying something new. Now, if that's not accessible to people who are coming to it for the first time, that's going to really put them off. So this is a really good opportunity for some organisations, and actually even organisations that are having to operate in very different ways. So the National Theatre have productions online now. You can't go to the National Theatre, but you can certainly experience the National Theatre in new ways at the moment that might attract new audiences for the future in a way now, if that's designed in a way that's accessible and inclusive of all. So I think there's real opportunities there.
It sounds like there is an opportunity for businesses, sort of large and small, to offer their services, entertainment, if you like, in a new way, but actually because they're starting from scratch, making them as accessible to as broad a range of people as possible. So building in captioning, subtitling, audio description if they can, thinking about how different customers are going to be using it and where they're going to be using it, and what they're really thinking about the demographics of the audience as well.
I think that's right, Bella. I think that we've done quite a lot of work on interpretation of objects and art with people who have access needs. And we've done that in the past with museums and art galleries. We're beginning to see people asking us to do it online as well. And that's not just about the accessibility features you might build in as standard, like captioning and audio description, but it's the way that you present and show, demonstrate, illustrate what it is you're actually doing. And that's quite interesting, a new area entirely.
Yeah.
I agree, and I think there's a pervasive impact of this that could go positively a lot longer than the impact of the lockdown and COVID-19 itself, that this is an opportunity for organisations to test out new channels to market that are required at the moment, but may be very desirable beyond this period to many people for lots of different reasons, and may create a new opportunity for their brand to engage with this, with a customer segment that they haven't yet attracted, because whether it's going to a physical space that's not particularly inclusive, whether it's because people are outside of the region that can get to it, and also thinking about how new technologies can enable that, whether it's as Rick's saying, really describing things, that's the way in which you do it, the method of doing it in a way that's very creative of itself, but then could also be leveraging, say, binaural audio, so 3D audio, so that you don't need to describe where sound comes from because they get that immediately. But that sound is just coming in from that space, and you just need to describe what's happening. So there are better ways of solving old problems as well that are there. And this might be a really interesting time to look to them, to leverage them.
And I think that's important, isn't it? Because we're hearing today, certainly in the UK, that this lockdown is going to last possibly for quite a long time. And even if it is partially restricted for a while, it might come back. We don't know when things are going to go back to the old normal at all. So there is something as well about customer confidence and general people confidence, because even if the lockdowns are removed, some people are not going to want to get back onto crowded planes, trains, buses and travel. They're not going to have that confidence, and are going to want to carry on doing things distant from a distance. And even if the people who are, there's got to be a built-in confidence that this is safe. And I think this is the time where businesses really need to think about, when they do open up again, how are they going to inspire that confidence in all customers and reach those new markets as well, about staying socially distant still and safe, even if they are coming in physically, or having that hybrid of, if you don't want to, you can do this remotely. I think that's going to be quite an interesting future
Mm,
challenge.
I think so, and I think one of the big drivers in this for me will be brand image. So Christy mentioned Ocado recently, which, as you know, Bella, has always been my shining example of accessibility in terms of online shopping. Actually, not anymore. Since they tried to deal with the crisis, they haven't done it very well. So what I think will happen is that those organisations that demonstrate they get this issue, and this is not just about disabled people, but they get the broader issue of accessing services, taking into account the new normal, and demonstrate they get it, understand it, and can explain it and articulate it, are going to do better than those that don't do that. And I think part of this is everything we've talked about today really starts online. And I think there are some real challenges for people who aren't online and how organisations think about engaging with that group of people, because it is actually still a substantial group of people. It's not a small number.
Yeah, I mean, somebody yesterday, I was talking to some businesses, and they were saying low tech, no tech actually has become a bigger issue than they thought. A lot of businesses were saying, yeah, we're going digital, we're going to move everything to digital, and that's been good in some respects here. But then they've identified a group of people, I think that you were talking about being on the edges of your circle, Christine, who are still low tech, no tech, and they still need to serve these customers.
This is really important group, and this group, which has always been there, is there in different formats at the moment, and it's the impact of them being there is much more profound right now. So, as an organisation, to really consider those people that may not have digital confidence and skills, or also may not have the devices, the connectivity that they need, and financial vulnerability comes into this in a significant way as well. So, whether it's because they don't have the channel, because they don't have a smartphone or 3 smartphones for 3 people in a house, they might have one that they're sharing between them. They don't have the connectivity, or they don't have the digital confidence and skills to be able to do that without someone supporting them, and they might not have access to that person at the moment. There are more people excluded digitally today, and that exclusion has got a more profound impact. And I think it's really important for organisations, and the lovely thing is we're hearing about from organisations who are considering that group and thinking about how do we support their needs. So whether you can look to developing countries and think about how do they use feature phones to connect with their customers. You can think about how do you use telephony. Now that's going to still limit people with hearing loss, but how can you bring people with hearing loss in? So to take each of those groups, to understand who those are, to think about, well, that's good for some. What do we do with those that doesn't work for? And to provide alternatives. I suppose that's the one word that if you take away something from this, it's recognise that alternatives will be needed because there are fewer options to everyone now. And to some people, those options are more, limited subset of your total because of people's access needs. And so to provide some additional alternatives for people, whether it's because they don't have the digital skills, confidence or tools, whether it's because they may not have the confidence to go back into public, after this, as you were just, absolutely rightly talking about, Bella, or whether they're going into those environments but needing to protect themselves and manage themselves in different ways, to really think through who might have sensory, physical, cognitive, mental health needs, physical health needs, digital skills needs, that full spectrum, and think, how will each of these groups be impacted by the solutions we're offering? Who might be excluded from them? And do we have a sensible alternative for them to still engage with our brand in a way that, as Rick rightly says, at the end of the day is brand accreditive? We know that brand loyalty and brand perception is created at those moments of truth that are very important to an individual. And those moments of truth happen more fully when there's more emotional or physical or other impact around it. This is one of those times. This is when an action from a brand will have an above normal impact on their overall brand perception by customers. And that's a fabulous opportunity but it is also a risk for those brands that are not aware of what those experiences are if they're creating poor experiences out there.
Okay, no, that's really interesting, really important points. And I do want to say, if you do have questions, do let us know. We'll have a couple of minutes at the end. But I didn't want to finish without talking about essential services as well, because we've talked about brand and we've talked about shopping, and obviously food and medicine is essential, but there are other essential services as well that are still running and need to run. I'm talking about the police reporting crimes, GPs for non-COVID related illnesses, dentists if you've got toothache, hospitals, lawyers, they're all still working. And what is the situation like if you need to contact someone urgently to report a crime? Domestic abuse is becoming a bit of an issue as well, so you need to get the police and the courts injunctions involved, or if you need medical help or to get your toothache sorted. Any advice briefly on that?
The situation seems to be very fluid and variable. You may notice I broke a tooth a couple of weeks ago and I can't get it fixed. It doesn't look very nice, but it's not considered an emergency, and they're only treating emergencies in hubs. So even if it was an emergency, getting there could be a real challenge if you've never been there before, etc. The systems, as I understand it, talking to my network, say that they seem to be working pretty much, but clunky. So contacting the emergency services and that's not a major issue. I mean, I'm sure there are specific times when it is a problem. But the whole sort of court thing, the benefits claimant system, all of that is really struggling. And they're over-relying, on my view, on sort of the whole do it electronically type approach, which will disproportionately impact on people with access needs inevitably. And I think a group that we don't think about very often is that with this new sort of approach to everything is people who are, quotes, vulnerable typically will not argue, fight their corner, insist on what they should have. So most people like us are quite capable of arguing our corner. If someone says, no, you can't do it that way, I think we might say, well, I think I can. Other people, especially some vulnerable groups, and research in Ofcom shows this very clearly, just say, oh, okay. And that's the end of it. So we do have a problem, I think, in some of these areas about sensitivity and engagement and understanding the issues, that it can't all be dealt with online.
I think there's a really interesting point in health. So people that have long-term health conditions have just essentially having the same needs that they had 4 or 5 months ago, but the supply of services has just gone down dramatically. So we have, from the research we're doing at the moment, the ethnography, we know that there's some individuals that are trying to just get their normal health services because they've got long-term, very significant health conditions. And it's taking them much longer to get a new prescription, to then go and get that filled. So if there's anything where things are in a process, and as an example of this, one particular individual, she has a long-term health condition. She needs to manage that with medication. She needed a new medication, and that new medication took time to get, but then she couldn't use her standard pharmacy because it was too hard to add something that was new. If it was in her regular basket, it was okay to do and she could get a delivery, but because it was something that was new, it fell through their process. So she then went to another pharmacy so that she could get it home delivered. So it's, again, just there is more demand in the system. So people who have to be in the system for other reasons, it's getting more difficult and things take longer and are more complex. So, and just the delivery itself, she might have been able to go to a pharmacy normally, but in this situation, she definitely doesn't want to. The other thing is, let's talk about education for a moment, which is another vital service. We want our children educated. And if you think about either parents who have disabilities trying to be teachers in their home and manage the information the school's sending and support their children's learning, or parents who have children with disabilities and various access needs, trying to manage, again, the environment in the home and focusing them on their studies in a way that is not disadvantaging them relative to other children, but is also giving them an environment at home that's a learning environment and gives them the engagement during the day intellectually as well as, you know, physically and emotionally and so on, that we're all wanting our children to have. Again, there's these new layers of inclusion and exclusion that we've got to think about. And so for school systems to really think about, when you're sending information out to parents, may the parents have an access need that you've got to make sure that there's an alternative for them, or for the children that have specific needs, how well is the way that you're asking them to engage set up? And all of this has been done very quickly without a lot of, you know, meetings and preparation and research and planning before it, because it had to happen in such a short period. So let's recognise where we are. Let's be a little bit, I think we need to recognise that everybody has got, not, you know, most people have positive intent in trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And that they've been put in a situation, whether they're a school, whether they're an organisation trying to supply home deliveries in a way that they didn't before. A lot of organisations and environments have very positive intent, but they need that help of feedback from where these aren't working, so they can start finding alternatives and ways around it. So actually one of the things we can do as, you know, my parents of neurodiverse kids, of people with various access needs, is to note where things are challenging and to start to work, you know, with the organisation to say, this is difficult for me. And as Rick says, you know, self-advocating and saying, in a way that's empathetic, recognising that they didn't have, you know, a year to put in place this new system, but to share with them, here's how it feels and here's why it feels like that, and here's the difficulty, and wherever possible, and here's a potential solution that might work for me. And that may well be very advantageous to a lot of other people who might not self-advocate so proactively.
Yeah, and I think that's really, really important, Christine. But one of the questions as well is the people, and it goes to your point, Rick, about people who don't self-advocate or can't self-advocate. And there is a real issue around people, for example, who have care needs. And of course, carers, we know, are still going into people's homes. You can't socially distance if you're physically caring for someone. But if a carer is off sick or needs to self-isolate themselves, that can be a very life or death situation for some people, quite literally, and they are the people who need to be able to say, you know, I need help, and so that's that is a really important point, and finding systems, finding ways to make sure that people don't fall through the net there. I think that's a really important point. So okay, well, thank you so much, Rick and Christine. I think that's been absolutely fascinating. So as I said, you know, we were talking about disabled customers and supporting businesses who serve customers today. There have been this is a series of webinars. We talked about mental health last week. We've talked about technology and supporting people working from home in the past, and all of those are on our website, on the COVID-19 Toolkit, on the Business Disability Forum website, and this one will be on the website shortly too, and they're on our YouTube channel as well. So please do have a look at all of those if there's other subjects that you were interested in on there. So please, and get in touch. Members and partners of Business Disability Forum, we're still here, we're still working, and happy to try and help with this, any new challenges or anything that's come up from today. So it leaves me just to say a very big thank you to Rick and Christine, and to all of you who have been listening and watching today, and hopefully see you again soon. Okay, thank you very much.